World War II was one of the most ferocious wars the world has ever witnessed, claiming the lives of up to 60 million people or more. World War II wreaked havoc worldwide and ravaged Europe in its entirety. World War II commenced on September 1939 when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, and Great Britain and France responded just 2 days later by declaring war against Germany. Germany, Italy, and Japan united as the Axis powers to combat the Allies, including Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, the United States, and China to a small extent. The war lasted 6 years and ended on May 8th of 1945, when Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30th after the Red Army took over the German territory under Soviet control and the Allied armies merged in Berlin, defeating the Third Reich. Murder, rape, robberies were widespread during the war era. There were no rules and regulations for armies regarding how to treat the civilians of a captured region. Invaders would treat the prisoners of war brutally, kidnap the women and children, and treat them to their liking, despite the reprimands from international forums. Not only was the period of World War II vicious, but the aftermath of World War II was even more gut-wrenching. The war left millions dead and far more many homeless. The European economy would crumble, and most of the European infrastructure had been demolished. Those who survived sustained severe injuries, scars, burns, chronic pains, psychological trauma, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and some of the survivors would lose their limbs and become permanently disabled or bedridden. Asia bore the brunt of the war as well. Japan was utterly devastated when the United States dropped its first atomic bomb on Hiroshima and the second one on Nagasaki in retaliation after the Pearl Harbor attack. Nevertheless, World War II saw the development of many innovations, such as computers, radars, and penicillin. Indeed, many technological advances occurred during these barbaric years related to weaponry, navigation, travel, and medicine. Archaeologists, researchers, and individuals all found precious artifacts belonging to World War II, including lost treasures, historically significant statues, the famous Amber Room, and many more. However, some findings from World War II left everyone baffled. World War II left staunch stains on the Earth and its dwellers, as well as numerous unexplainable enigmas. Today, we'll tell you about some of the most mysterious discoveries from World War II that no one can explain. An unexploded bomb. Due to severe drought this year, a World War II bomb submerged in an Italian river has been discovered. Fishermen would discover the 450-kilogram bomb on the banks of the polluted River Po. The 650-kilometer-wide river has dried up in large portions due to Italy's worst drought in 70 years. Fears about climate change's impact have increased due to scorching weather and low rainfall levels in northern Italy. According to Italian military sources, the unexploded weapon was found in July close to the Lombardy town of Borgo Vergilio. According to reports, 3,000 local people were evacuated so that bomb disposal specialists could safely conduct a controlled explosion. The area's airspace was briefly closed along with the river traffic on the channel. The Po is the longest river in Italy, flowing from the Southwest Alps to the Adriatic Sea. However, satellite photographs from this year would reveal growing stretches of dried-up riverbed due to an unprecedented drought. Last month, Italian authorities issued an emergency declaration for the Po's environment, which irrigates around one-third of the nation's agricultural output. Due to the heat, along with the lack of rain in recent months, the river's current has become so weak that farmers in the Po Valley claim salty salt water is seeping into the river and destroying their crops. Long-lost soldier. An 8-decade riddle has been finally resolved for a family in southern Mississippi. Since he vanished during the Battle of Bunagona in World War II, Harrison County native Private Andrew Ladner's whereabouts have remained a mystery. The American authorities declared that Ladner's remains had been located in February. The defense, Prisoners of War Missing in Action Accounting Agency, would send the alert. According to the DPAA, Ladner was sent to combat the Japanese forces for control of the port of Buna in the southern highland jungles of Australian New Guinea in November of 1942. The objective of this troop was to cut off Japanese communications and their supply lines that were adjacent to the settlement of Sanananda. Ladner was killed on the battlefield. According to old newspaper accounts, he was a native of Lizana, Mississippi. He was 30 years old when he passed away. Perkinston Junior College, which is now Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, was where he would receive his diploma, and after searching the battlefield for American troops' remains for many years, the American Graves Registration Service ruled that Ladner was unrecoverable in 1950. Ladner's bones were then discovered in April of 1943 and interned at a makeshift American cemetery in the adjacent town of Soputa. In 1949, an unidentified amount of remains were then transported to the Philippines and interned in a different cemetery. The corpse, then identified by experts at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, using advanced technology which included DNA analysis. Remains of Hideki Toyo. The whereabouts of Hideki Toyo's remains, the Japanese prime minister who controlled his nation's World War II effort, have been a puzzle for more than 70 years. Toyo's great-grandson claimed that he had always thought that just his ancestors' hair and nails were interned at a family grave in northwest of Tokyo. He had no idea where the remaining pieces of a body were. However, the answer had always been concealed in plain sight. American military personnel would dump Toyo's ashes in the Pacific Ocean soon after his death, after executing him as a Class A war criminal, according to declassified records that have been found in the National Archives of the United States that a Japanese scholar had uncovered. Toyo was found guilty of war crimes by an international military tribunal, and the disposal was done to stop Japanese nationalists from accessing the remains and presenting him as a martyr to the world. 5 sunken submarines. Tim Taylor received the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award in 2021, the highest civilian distinction in the Navy. His crew is credited with finding 288 men's ultimate resting places, all of whom were kept captive inside what had become submerged graves. 7 Navy submarines have been discovered by Taylor's crew, 5 of which vanished during the Second World War. Taylor, a World War II Navy veteran's son, has dedicated his life to discovering the ocean's unexplored regions, beginning with concentrating on scientific research, which would help him find a lot of reefs all across the world. He took a part in the underwater archaeology missions and shark studies, and hosted multiple National Geographic excursions. It's not about finding ships, Taylor would say. The importance of the work is to connect families and bring some type of closure and peace even generations later. Upon discovering the ill-fated submarines, Taylor would set up a website where he put out the details of the sunken ships. Many families connected with Taylor through the site whose loved ones had been in those unfortunate vessels. They were able to say their last goodbyes by boarding a vessel to the Atlantic with Taylor and dropping flowers in the sea, rendering them some sense of closure. Missing U-boats. Amazing photographs have been taken of a German U-boat that sunk off the British coast during World War II. According to the British news outlet SWNS, the pictures were obtained by a diving company, which led a party of divers to the wreckage of U-1021. The ship is 9 nautical miles from Cornwall's shore. 2 additional U-boats that also sank during the war are close to the wreckage. The representative would note that the 85-minute dive involved 4 divers, who all spent 30 minutes at the bottom. Before dissipating in March of 1945, U-1021 was a member of the 31st U-boat flotilla. Many additional World War II submarines, including German U-boats, have been discovered in recent years. U-581 was found in February of 2017 in the Atlantic Ocean off the Azores, close to the south shore of Pico Island at a depth of 2,953 feet. Around 403 feet below sea level in April of 2018, Danish researchers found the U-3523 off the coast of Skagen, the northernmost town in Denmark. 77 years after its disappearance in the Mediterranean during the Second World War, the wreckage of the Royal Navy submarine HMS Urge would be found in November of 2019. Divers would find the debris of the patrol boat USS Eagle PE-56, one of the last American warships that was lost by a German submarine during World War II in July of 2019, just a few miles off the coast of Maine. Secret bunker. In the Scottish borders in 2020, a secret World War II bunker would be discovered as workers cut down trees. Forestry and Land Scotland recently uncovered the building in Craigslands Forest close to Moffat. The bunker is said to have served as a base for an auxiliary unit, also known as Churchill's Secret Army. Local estate workers who knew the local terrain like the back of their hand were frequently included in the highly trained crews. This finding sheds light on one of the most undercover organizations that would operate throughout the Second World War. These bunkers are tough to locate because their sites were always kept a secret, and most of them were either lost or then buried. Records would show that this bunker was utilized by about 7 soldiers equipped with revolvers, some machine guns, sniper rifles, and explosives, and auxiliary units were known as scallywags. They were instructed to battle until they died. If the Nazis came, they were to bring about mayhem behind enemy lines. Many distinguished themselves when the battalions were disbanded by joining the SAS or other special forces for D-Day. Kit Roger, an FLS survey technician, discovered the border's bunker. Sunken Karlsruhe. The German World War II steamship Karlsruhe was struck by Soviet aircraft and sank in the Baltic Sea in April of 1945. Killing hundreds of those who were on board. In 2020, a team of Polish divers would discover the intact remains of the ship. According to the 10-person team, the wreckage is 290 feet in the water, many kilometers north of Ustka, a Polish seaside resort. They claim to have discovered military equipment, china, and well-preserved locked chests in the ship's hold amongst the rubble. According to the organization, the finding may also resolve a 75-year-old mystery about the whereabouts of the Amber Room, an opulent Russian room that the Nazis had stolen. According to the records that were provided to the Associated Press, the Karlsruhe would be constructed in 1905. It was part of the Hannibal operation, which took place after the Second World War and evacuated German and Nazi forces from East Prussia as the Soviet Red Army approached and took control. With 888 passengers, including children, 150 members of the Hermann Göring unit, 25 railroad employees, and tons of freight, departed Germany on April 11th of 1945, headed for Poland. The ship would be spotted by Soviet aircraft on April 13th of 1945, where they then attacked the vessel and sank it within 3 minutes. Amongst the 1,083 passengers on board, 113 would be saved by the convoy. According to Nazi Navy documentation, a German telegram that the British intercepted, and survivor tales, which are kept in the German archives. Disappeared landing craft. A riddle has been solved with the discovery of a World War II shipwreck. It would be located more than 100 miles from where it was initially believed to have sunk. In 1943, the Mark III landing craft tank LCT-326, with 14 crew members, would vanish during its route from Troon to Devon. Although the admiral first believed it had sunk close to the Isle of Man, it would then be found off the Welsh coast in 2020. In fact, there has been an attempt to identify hundreds of wrecks in the Welsh seas, and this finding was included in the process. The vessel was made in Middlesbrough and intended to be used as an amphibious operations vehicle to dock armored vehicles of the kind widely utilized in the D-Day landings in June of 1944. According to records in the National Archives, it was a component of the 7th LCT flotilla that departed from Troon on January the 31st of the year 1943 to reach Appledore. It was last observed the next day, and it was assumed that it had actually collided with a mine or even encountered severe weather. The wreckage is now visible in sonar data that's been acquired by experts from the universities of Bangor and Bournemouth, more than 100 miles off of Bardsey Island. Missing bomber. Project Recover, a group of marine scientists, archaeologists, and volunteers working together to find aircraft linked to World War I MIAs, would discover a B-24D-1 bomber that was named Heaven Can Wait in Hansa Bay off the coast of Papua New Guinea in 2018. The bomber would be connected to 11 American service members who were all listed as MIA during the Second World War. On March the 11th of 1944, the Heaven Can Wait crew was on a mission to attack Japanese anti-aircraft guns in Hansa Bay when their B-24 would be shot down by enemy fire, causing it to fall into the water. They were a part of the 320th Squadron of the Jolly Roger's 90th Bombardment Group. The crew had landed in Papua New Guinea just 4 months earlier to prepare for World War II action against the Japanese forces. Present Papua New Guinea was the site of a military action in the Pacific from January of 1942 all the way through to the war's end in August of 1945, where substantial losses of aircraft and service members would be incurred. After receiving 4 years' worth of material on the crash's causes, gathered by family members of one of the B-24 crew members seeking closure for their lost loved one, Project Recover set its sights on discovering Heaven Can Wait. These records would contain historical first-hand accounts from authorized military reports, mission files, and crew members' diaries on interactions with other aircraft while the B-24 was in flight. A crew from Project Recover then went out in October of 2017 to conduct an archaeological assessment of Hansa Bay, which is thought to have been the last resting place of 5 U.S. aircraft with 24 MIAs lost in brutal World War II fighting. The location of Heaven Can Wait was considered to be offshore the north end of the bay based on historical evidence. Project Recover would discover the debris of the B-24 bomber Heaven Can Wait 213 feet underwater after 11 days at sea, and a search that covered nearly 27 square kilometers of the seafloor using scanning sonars, high-definition imagers, advanced diving, and unmanned aerial and underwater robotic technologies. The U.S. government has been officially informed of the crash site so that they can begin finding and identifying the remains of up to 11 crew members who have been missing for more than 70 years. Grenadier Shipwreck. After being assaulted by Japanese aircraft in April of 1943, the USS Grenadier was scuttled. According to stories, the crew members who survived were tortured at a detention camp for more than 2 years. A World War II submarine that was abandoned 77 years ago and is now teeming with marine life would be discovered by 4 divers in the dark waters off the Strait of Malacca, roughly 90 miles south of Phuket, Thailand. The 4 divers in question would discover the debris, which is thought to be the USS Grenadier, for the first time in October of 2019. One of them would help the 2018 rescue of the boys' soccer team that was trapped in a cave in northern Thailand. Over the following 6 months, the men undertook 6 meticulously scheduled dives, all in order to be able to analyze and identify the submarine. The crew was satisfied that they had identified the Grenadier after measuring various submarine components like the hatches and capstans and compared their measurements to technical drawings from the National Archives and Records Administration. Grenadier is almost 300 feet long, weighing in at 1,475 tons, according to the Naval History and Heritage Command, which is in charge of documenting, analyzing, and disseminating American naval history. It's named after a deep-sea fish with a long body and a short pointed tail. The ship was discovered upright and more than 260 feet underwater, according to the divers who would note that it was partially covered in fishing nets. Bismarck Battleship. Dr. Robert D. Ballard's objective was to locate and document Bismarck's wreck once he had discovered the Titanic wreckage in 1985. It would be in July of 1988 that the hunt for the wreckage would get underway, but his initial mission was actually unsuccessful. He launched a second mission in late May of 1989, and on the 8th of June 1989, Ballard and his colleagues eventually discovered Bismarck's remains after searching a region of around 200 square kilometers. The wreckage is located 4,790 meters below the Atlantic Ocean's surface, about 470 miles west of Brest. The hull is upright and immersed in mud that extends from the keel roughly through the waterline of the ship's design. The battleship suffered significant shell and torpedo damage from the British, the evident consequences of the sinking, yet the wreck remains remarkably in decent shape. Only a few other shipwrecks have been as beautifully preserved as the Bismarck, and the hull remains in its entirety, but for the last 35 feet of the stern, which broke off. The main battery turrets are now upside down on the bottom after falling off the ship's hull. owing to their weight when it turned over and sunk. However, most of the anti-aircraft guns and the secondary battery turrets remain intact in their correct positions. It was a terrifying mixture of size, speed, and weaponry, along with a potent illustration of Germany's ascent from the ashes of the First World War. To comply with the requirements of the Washington Naval Treaty, which set restrictions on battleship sizes, Bismarck was initially intended to weigh 35,000 tons, but the Allies only learned the actual displacement of the Bismarck, which was 50,933 tons when fully loaded, after they had obtained top-secret German Navy records after the Second World War. Hidden Nazi Bunker. Exhumations on the Channel Island of Alderney have unearthed a Nazi bunker that was built inside wrecks of the nunnery, one of the most well-preserved Roman fortresses in the British Isles. The shelter was built by German troops while the Channel Islands, an archipelago off the coast of France's Normandy, were occupied by the Nazis. The occupation would last from June of 1940 all the way through to May of 1945 and was the only successful German invasion of British territories during World War II. Nazi soldiers built the recently discovered stronghold just inside of the nunnery's 10-foot thick walls. According to archaeologist Jason Monaghan, volunteers assisted the excavations from Dig Alderney, a nonprofit that promotes archaeological study on the island. They discovered a whole series of buildings, sewers, and impenetrable walls that would intersect each other. The crew saw 3 levels on top of one another and sought to determine what eras that each one had belonged to. The nunnery, which overlooks Longus Bay, has been operating for around 1,700 years, and Monaghan would point out that the Romans had constructed the military outpost around the tail end of the 4th century CE, when the imperial grip over Britain was waning. They would renovate the fort with cutting-edge defenses, and the Dig Alderney crew also looked inside of the Sun Chamber, one of the only portions of the fort that was unaffected by the German occupation, in addition to excavating the Nazi bunker. It was believed that this area had information about what had happened to the place after the Romans had evacuated. Other noteworthy locations were a square structure that most likely belonged to the Victorian era and a mystery building shown as a ruin on a 1739 map. Lost U.S. aircrafts. 3 American military airplanes that were lost during a battle in the Pacific theater of the war in February of 1944 would recently be discovered by researchers from Project Recover, a collaboration between the universities of Delaware and California, San Diego, that aimed to find and repatriate Americans missing in action since World War II. According to a press release, the crew searched Truk Lagoon in the Chuuk state of Micronesia and found 2 SBD-5 Dauntless dive bombers and 1 TBM F-1 Avenger. Operation Hailstone, a 2-day Allied air attack on Japanese naval facilities, took place there 76 years ago. During the conflict, more than 50 Japanese ships and 230 aircraft, including 30 American planes, would be lost to the lagoon's depths. Project Recover was able to locate the American planes, which can be hard to find amongst the variety of coral-covered wreckage at the bottom of Truk Lagoon, thanks to an aviation gunner's report of the action. According to Colin Colburn, historian for Project Recover, the gunner was shooting on a Japanese transport ship when he witnessed a Dauntless dive bomber crash and sink. 4 expeditions were undertaken by a study team between April of 2018 and December of 2019. The group would explore around 27 square miles of the lagoon using an autonomous robot that had repeatedly scanned the ocean floor with sonar, finding evidence of artificial debris in 61 locations. When divers and camera-equipped robots would further explore the region, they then discovered the debris fields covered with the airplane's wreckage at depths that ranged from 100 to 200 feet. Nazi Eagle. A massive bronze eagle would be recovered in 2006 by divers who had been hired by a private family. Before being harmed and scuttled, Admiral Graf Spee preyed upon trade ships in the South Atlantic. There's been controversy about a sizable Nazi eagle found upon the ship. A court would rule in 2019 that the government of Uruguay had to sell the Nazi eagle that was recovered from a wrecked German battleship from World War II. The stern of the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee, sunk off the South American coast when World War II began, had a roughly 800-pound eagle with a swastika in its talons. The eagle, kept in a wooden box in a naval storehouse, was then ordered to be auctioned within 90 days. The court would rule that the money had to be distributed amongst the project's investors, who helped to unearth the artifact from the River Plate. Germany has previously said that it opposed the commercialization of any Nazi-era symbols, but would support the display of the eagle in an appropriate historical setting, such as a museum. Before being stopped and crippled during the Battle of the River Plate by 2 British cruisers and one from New Zealand, which began on December 13th of 1939, the Graf Spee sank several Allied commercial ships in the South Atlantic. Bluey East II. Under an agreement between the United States and Denmark in 1941, the United States Air Force would set up a base on an island in Greenland, naming it the Bluey East II. Greenland was then fully part of Denmark and became an autonomous state only years later. The United States would abandon the base after the war in 1947, and it now serves as bitter remnants of the blood-curdling events of the Second World War. According to people who had served at the base, the United States military left behind buildings made of asbestos, innumerable barrels of leaded aviation fuel, rusting metal trucks, and perhaps hundreds of containers of undetonated dynamite. Locals dubbed the tangerine-corroding barrels American flowers, since they look like vast fields of marigold flowers on a sunny day. The Bluey East II base reeks quite literally of toxicity. Over 10,000 fuel barrels were left behind. Leaded fuel used at that time was much more toxic than the fuel that we use today. Bluey East II is just one of the 30 forsaken United States military facilities that functioned from World War II up until the Cold War. In January of 2018, Denmark would announce to contribute $29 million over 6 years in an effort to clean up the toxic remains of the abandoned military bases that were in Greenland. However, experts have claimed that the amount was insufficient to finish the cleaning job. In 2019, cleanup would begin at the former American military bases. Which one of these World War II discoveries did you find the most intriguing of all? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.